We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Carl Jung. Imagine this. You wake up one morning and stumble to the bathroom, as you've done 1,000 times before. The mirror greets you with its usual indifference. You see the same familiar face, the same eyes, the same lines on your skin, the same routine gestures. You lean in, maybe adjust your hair, maybe frown. You think nothing of it. But today, something feels off. The reflection looks right, but it doesn't feel right. It mimics your movements perfectly, yet there's a lag you can't quite explain, not in time, but in truth. It's like the mirror is showing you someone real, but not someone whole. You blink, you shake it off. Just a weird feeling, but that thought returns. Who am I actually looking at? You tell yourself it's you. Of course it's you, but what does that even mean? Is this face the sum of your memories, your choices, your genetics? Or is it a mask that's been worn for so long you forgot you were even wearing it? And here comes the deeper question, the one you can't shake, the one that splinters through your sense of self like a hairline fracture. What if the person in the mirror is the lie, and the one you've buried inside is the truth? What if you've spent your entire life being edited, pruned, socially accepted, emotionally conditioned, until all that remains is an image, a shell that smiles when it's supposed to, says the right things, makes the acceptable moves, and never disturbs the water? What if the world has taught you so well how to be seen that you've forgotten how to be? You've followed the rules. You've conformed to expectations. You've made yourself palatable, digestible, efficient, and in the process, you've become invisible to yourself because the reflection is familiar, but it's also suspiciously clean. Too neat, too filtered, too rehearsed. Where's the chaos? Where's the anger you were told to hide? Where's the lust, the grief, the hunger for more that keeps clawing at you when you're alone? Where is the part of you that doesn't care what anyone thinks? The part that once dreamed recklessly? The part that cried when no one else did? The part that wanted to scream in the middle of that board meeting or dinner party and ask, why are we all pretending? You buried those parts, didn't you? Because they weren't useful. Because they weren't loved, because they were labeled too much or not enough. And every time you did, the mirror grew a little more dishonest. Until now. Now you stare at it and realize it's been lying to you in plain sight. Not because it's broken, but because you've been taught to see only what's acceptable. Here's the paradox. The more socially acceptable you become, the less authentic you feel. The more you align with what others want to see, the more disconnected you are from the person screaming behind the glass. You become successful, but you feel hollow. You look confident, but you're terrified someone will find out who you really are. You smile, but something inside you wants to burn the whole script and start again. This isn't just a personal crisis. This is an existential one, because if the mirror is lying, and if everything you've called you has been shaped by the fear of rejection, the need for approval, or the avoidance of pain, then how do you know who you are at all? Where do you end and your programming begins? Who would you be if no one had ever told you who to be? Now the tension rises, because you can feel it, can't you? That itch under the skin, that haunting suspicion that your reflection is a compromise, that the person the world sees is the price you paid to be safe, but not whole. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You'll look in every mirror and wonder, is this the person I became, or the person I sacrificed myself to become? What would happen if you looked deeper? What would happen if you dared to find out who's living behind the image? That's the question, and it doesn't just demand an answer, it demands a confrontation. You were not born with a mirror, you were born with a scream, with wild eyes, with a body that thrashed, and a spirit that demanded everything. You didn't ask permission to exist, you simply did. Then came the reflection, not the glass kind, but the social kind. A mother's gaze, a father's tone, a teacher's approval, a stranger's frown. Little by little, the world began shaping your identity, not from the inside out, but from the outside in. Carl Jung called this process the formation of the persona, the social mask we create to function in the world. It is not inherently evil. You need a mask to navigate society, to belong, to communicate. But here lies the danger. When you confuse the mask for your face, you lose your soul. The persona becomes the mirror that dictates your reality. You dress it. You perform it. You become addicted to its feedback. Am I being liked? Do they respect me? Do I fit in? And every yes feels like oxygen, temporary, fleeting, addictive. But something in you starts to suffocate because the persona is curated. It's edited to erase the inconvenient truths, your envy, your rage, your despair, your yearning for chaos or rebellion. And all these cast-off parts don't vanish. They retreat into the shadows. Jung called this the shadow self, the unconscious reservoir of everything you repress. Not just the ugly, but the powerful, the primal, the sacred. Society, Jung said, encourages us to identify with the persona and deny the shadow. But when the shadow is denied, it grows hungry. It becomes volatile. It finds other ways to make itself known through dreams, self-sabotage, projection, anxiety, addiction. You might look calm, but you're seething underneath. You might look successful, but you feel like a fraud. You might look loved, but you can't feel it because you've amputated parts of your own being to survive. And now the phantom limb aches. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this tension with terrifying clarity. He spoke of the slave morality imposed by societies, systems that teach us to equate obedience with goodness, self-denial with virtue, and conformity with morality. But Nietzsche warned, this morality is not made for the strong. It is made to suppress them. Your hunger to speak, to challenge, to create, to become. All of it is labeled arrogance or madness. So you shrink, you dilute yourself, you make yourself small and digestible. But Nietzsche didn't just condemn this system, he offered a radical antidote. Become who you are. This wasn't a call to narcissism, it was a call to remember the self that preceded socialization, to live from the inside out, rather than from the mirror back inward. But how? Arthur Schopenhauer, ever the pessimist, saw life as a ceaseless struggle of blind will, an endless hunger that could never be satisfied. He believed selfhood itself was an illusion, a construct built by desire and ego. If Schopenhauer is right, then the mirror is not just lying, it's showing a fiction written by craving. But what if you could see through that craving? That's where mystics and existentialists pick up the thread. Jean-Paul Sartre, for instance, believed that existence precedes essence, that you are not born with meaning, but must create it. Yet most people recoil from this freedom. It terrifies them. So they choose what Sartre called bad faith, living according to scripts written by others to avoid the burden of freedom. You perform roles, student, employee, lover, parent, not because they emerge from your core, but because they offer structure. They help you forget the vertigo of being untethered. But the price is authenticity. And here's the greatest tragedy. The more roles you play, the more you forget you're acting. Now let's descend one layer deeper into trauma. Dr. Gabor Mate, whose work with addiction and childhood trauma has reshaped modern psychology, argues that most people lose their true selves not out of rebellion, but out of necessity. As children, we are wired for two needs, attachment and authenticity. When those come into conflict, when being authentic risks abandonment, we choose attachment. You learned quickly, if I show this part of myself, I will not be loved. So you buried it, and you never really stopped. This is not weakness, it's adaptation, it's survival. But the cost? Chronic inauthenticity, a life of masks, an identity that exists more in performance than in presence. This is why the mirror lies, because it shows you the socially rewarded self, but not the authentic self. And the longer you stare into that mirror without questioning it, the more your reflection becomes a prison, a haunting echo of who you were told to be. Even Aldous Huxley warned of this kind of psychological hypnosis in his prophetic novel, Brave New World. He saw a future where people wouldn't be enslaved by force, but by pleasure, sedation, and distraction. They would be so entertained, so numbed by comfort and stimulation that they would never question the illusion. And isn't that what the mirror has become? A device of comfort, a source of approval, a shield against the unknown. But that shield comes at a price. It blocks the raw, terrifying, necessary confrontation with your real self, the one that remembers, the one that hungers, the one that whispers at night when the world is silent. This isn't all there is. There's a strange silence that follows a life lived behind glass. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's quiet, insidious, a slow drift into numbness camouflaged by routine. You check your phone, you answer emails, you laugh at the right moments. And yet, beneath it all, there's a sensation you can't quite name. Something is missing, not something external, not a job or a relationship or a new place to live, something internal, a spark, a pulse, the visceral feeling of being alive. That's the cost of living as your reflection. It's not just inauthenticity, it's disconnection from meaning, from presence, from the body itself. It shows up in subtle, pervasive ways: chronic anxiety, unexplained sadness, restlessness, an inability to be alone with your own thoughts. The outer world sees competence, the inner world feels hollow, and most people never trace the source of this suffering. They blame it on stress, on their partner, on their boss, on politics, on fate. But the truth is crueler. You suffer because you are estranged from yourself. Psychologically, this estrangement begins early, reinforced by a culture that rewards appearances over essence. Cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort of holding two conflicting beliefs, becomes your daily state. You smile when you're empty. You say, "I'm fine," when you're not. You nod in agreement when something inside you screams, "No." And every time you betray your truth to maintain your image, the gap widens. It's like living in a house with a locked basement. You entertain guests upstairs, but below, something is moving. Something that hasn't seen light in years. You hear it at night. It rattles the floorboards. And still, you pretend it doesn't exist. Eventually, that which is repressed returns, not gently, but violently. In dreams, in addictions, in sudden, inexplicable outbursts, in the slow creep of apathy. You stop caring about the things that once mattered. You start wondering why nothing satisfies you anymore. Because when you live behind the mirror, everything starts to feel like a copy of a copy. Love feels transactional. Success feels performative. Even joy feels staged, like you're playing yourself in a movie you didn't audition for. Socially, the consequences are just as severe. Our world is built on mirrors, likes, comments, curated profiles, and socially engineered identity. We no longer ask, "Who are you?" but rather, "What do you seem to be?" This has created a civilization of spectators and performers, locked in mutual surveillance. We don't relate to each other as selves. We relate to each other's avatars. And so, we lose the sacredness of intimacy. Conversations become rehearsed monologues. Friendships become transactions of validation. Romantic relationships become projections, two masks falling in love, while the real people remain hidden underneath, terrified of being exposed. And yet, we long to be seen, truly seen. But here's the paradox. You can't be seen unless you reveal what the mirror has hidden. And you can't reveal that truth unless you're willing to lose everything the mirror has helped you gain. Status, acceptance, comfort, control. It's a terrifying bargain. But the longer you delay it, the deeper the fracture grows. Neurologically, the cost is also measurable. Chronic suppression of emotion doesn't just affect your identity, it rewires your brain. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational control, becomes overactive, constantly filtering, editing, managing every word and gesture. Meanwhile, the limbic system, where your emotional truths live, grows dim, muted, silenced. You become overregulated, underfelt. Addiction researcher Dr. Mate points out that many compulsive behaviors, alcoholism, workaholism, screen addiction, aren't rooted in moral failure. They're rooted in emotional absence. In the attempt to fill a psychic void left by a life of disconnection, the addiction is not to pleasure, it's to escape. Escape from the ache of living as someone you're not. Escape from the grief of a self you can't remember. Escape from the silence of the mirror. And here lies perhaps the darkest consequence of all. When you lose yourself long enough, you stop believing you ever had a self to begin with. You start mistaking the mask for your face. You say things like, "This is just who I am," not realizing that what you call you is actually a collection of survival strategies. You stop asking questions, you stop dreaming, you stop defying, and then you join the others, the millions walking through life like sleepwalkers. Number pleasant, functional, terrified to look too closely, to feel too deeply, to speak too honestly. You avoid the mirror altogether, not because you don't like what you see, but because deep down, you suspect it's not showing you the whole picture. But here's the truth the world won't tell you. The mirror only reflects what you're willing to show it. It doesn't lie on its own. It lies because you asked it to. You told it what to hide. You trained it to ignore the shadow. You rehearsed the image so well that even the mirror forgot the original. And that's why the consequences are so invisible, so devastating. Because the greatest trick the mirror ever played was convincing you that your reflection wasn't a performance. You don't need to be broken to feel this disconnection. You just need to be human in a world that rewards illusion more than truth. And the longer you stay in that illusion, the harder it becomes to remember the real you. But the ache, the emptiness, the questions that won't die, they're not a sign of failure. They're a signal, a rebellion. Something buried is trying to break through. Something real. Let's imagine something dangerous. Imagine you stop performing. No polite smiles, no filtered thoughts, no calculated charm, just raw, unedited presence, unapologetic, unpredictable, untamed. Imagine how unsettling that would be, not just for others, but for you. Because when you drop the act, what emerges is not calm, it's chaos. A storm of conflicting urges, voices you've silenced, parts of yourself you abandoned long ago just to be loved, accepted, allowed. And that's where the rebellion begins. Not with an outward protest, but an inward mutiny. You reclaim the parts that were exiled. Carl Jung called this process individuation, not becoming someone new, but recovering the totality of who you've always been. Light and shadow, persona and instinct, the divine and the monstrous. It is not self-improvement, it is self-retrieval. But make no mistake, this is war, not with society, not even with other people, but with the internal gatekeepers, those quiet, inherited voices that whisper, "Don't say that, don't want that, don't be that." These are the inner tyrants formed by years of conditioning, the parental voice, the teacher's scolding, the religious guilt, the cultural norms. They've built a psychological police force within you, one that punishes authenticity and rewards performance. Rebellion begins by identifying them. Whose voice tells you you're too much? Whose gaze made you shrink? Whose approval are you still chasing? You were not born to live under their verdicts. You were born to become. Nietzsche understood this rebellion intimately. He saw conformity not just as weakness, but as spiritual death. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he introduced the concept of the Übermensch, not a tyrant, but a transcendent individual who has broken free from imposed morality and created their own values. But how does one become that? Not by domination, by transformation. The Übermensch doesn't reject suffering, he devours it, he alchemizes it, he turns the very forces that broke him into fuel for becoming unbreakable. He doesn't ask, "How can I fit in?" but "How can I become who I must become, even if it costs me everything?" This is the price of freedom, and most people are unwilling to pay it because freedom is lonely. When you stop living through mirrors, you stop being relatable. You confuse people, you unsettle them, because they still see through glass while you're learning to see with naked eyes. You'll lose friends, you'll outgrow relationships, you'll wander without a tribe, but in that silence, something else will arrive: clarity. This rebellion is not just philosophical, it's biological. Dr. Gabor Mate explains that when you begin to express your truth, when you honor your authentic needs and emotions, your physiology changes, your nervous system relaxes, chronic tension fades, addictive urges dissolve, because finally, you're no longer managing a lie. You're living a life that fits your nervous system, not your social programming. You become congruent, and with congruence comes power. Not the power to control others, but the power to stop betraying yourself. You stop needing the mirror. You become your own witness. But how do you start? It begins not with revolution, but with ritual, radical honesty. Every day ask, where did I pretend today? Where did I shrink? Where did I perform? Name it, don't justify it, just see it. Shadow journaling, write without filters. Let the exiled voices speak. Let the anger out. Let the envy, the lust, the shame rise. Don't fix it, just witness it. Mirror fasting. Literally avoid mirrors and social media for 24 to 72 hours. See how your behavior changes when you're not watching yourself. See who emerges when no one's looking. Authenticity experiments. Say what you really think. Ask the risky question. Disagree in public. Cry in front of someone. Watch what happens when you act without performing. Burn the scripts. Make a list of every identity label you cling to. Nice, smart, hardworking, cool. Then ask, what am I afraid would happen if I dropped this label? Confront that fear. This is not a spiritual retreat. This is a psychological jailbreak. And like any escape, it comes with blood and bruises. You'll grieve the version of you that was loved for being false. You'll feel the emptiness that performing once numbed. You'll have moments of terror when you realize, I don't know who I am without the mirror. Good, because now, finally, you're free to ask the real question, who am I when nothing is watching? And as you live into that question, not with answers but with presence, you begin to touch something ancient. Not a role, not a mask, not even a name, but a presence, a pulse, a knowing, the thing beneath the thing, the self before the self. And here's the twist. Once you find that, the mirror loses its power. You can still use it. You can still play roles. You can still navigate society, but you do it from a place of grounded truth, not desperate need. You are no longer inside the reflection. You are behind it, watching, choosing, free. And when others see you, something unspoken will happen. They will feel it, not the performance, the presence, and it will call something out in them too. The buried voice, the missing self, the soul, knocking from beneath the glass. There comes a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when the war inside you stops. Not because you've won, but because you've surrendered, not to the mirror, not to the world, but to the terrifying truth that you are not who you thought you were. You are more and less, and different, and ancient, and becoming. Imagine this. You're standing alone in a vast, silent field at dusk. The light is fading. No one is watching. There are no roles to play, no names to answer to. The wind carries no reflection, no echo. And for the first time, you are not thinking about how you appear. You are feeling yourself exist, not as a story, not as a brand, as being. And in that stillness, it hits you. You were never the mirror. You were the light behind it. This is the deepest realization. The game you've been playing of chasing identity, seeking validation, curating an image was never about truth. It was about protection. Because to be seen without illusion is to be vulnerable beyond comprehension. To walk the world without armor is to live in a state of exquisite exposure. That's why most people would rather be admired than understood. Admiration is safe. It keeps people at a distance. But understanding? That's dangerous. Because to be understood is to be touched. To be known is to be real. And to be real is to be mortal. Philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once said, "The deepest form of despair is to choose to be another than oneself." Not because it's morally wrong, but because it's existentially empty. The false self can succeed, it can seduce, it can rise, but it can never feel. And without feeling, what is success? What is love? What is life? Schopenhauer, grim but clear-eyed, believed that life was suffering, and our only escape was transcendence through art, compassion, or denial of desire. But perhaps there's another way. Not escape, but integration. To feel the suffering fully, to touch the despair, to sit with the absurdity, and in that raw confrontation to realize this is where the soul lives, not in perfection, in paradox. The ultimate truth is not that you are broken, it's that you are whole, and you've spent your life hiding from that wholeness because it's overwhelming to carry the entire spectrum of your being. Your genius and your shame, your wisdom and your rage, your dreams and your self-loathing is to carry fire. Most choose ice, but you are waking up, and you are starting to remember something that no mirror can reflect. You were born to burn, not to burn out, to burn through. There's a myth buried in your blood, an old story, older than language. It whispers to you in quiet moments. It sings when you're broken, when the noise dies down and the truth comes crawling through the cracks. The myth says this: you were not sent here to obey. You were not sent here to fit. You came to remember. And when you do, the world will shake. This is not self-help. This is soul recovery. Once, long ago, you knew who you were. Before the mirrors, before the applause, before the shame, you knew how to play, how to scream, how to cry without explaining, how to create without seeking praise. You were messy, loud, divine, and then they taught you to behave, to dim, to calculate, to hide. But no matter how long you've been gone, that self is not lost. It's waiting, in the dreams that scare you, in the desires you don't speak, in the truths you avoid, in the stillness. It waits. So what now? Now you stop looking for answers in the reflection. Now you walk toward the fire. Now you let the lies unravel, one thread at a time. You stop explaining yourself. You stop apologizing for your depth, your silence, your rage, your joy. You stop trying to be loved by the world you were meant to disrupt. And instead, you become a mirror of your own, one that reflects not how things seem, but how they are. There will be days when you forget, when you reach again for the mask, when the mirror seduces you with comfort. That's okay. The work is not about never falling back. The work is remembering that you can return to yourself over and over again. Every moment, a doorway. Every breath, a choice. And that is the ultimate freedom. Not to find yourself once and for all, but to create yourself again and again, in radical honesty, in unbearable beauty, in the face of fear. And in the end, when the last mirror breaks, when the final performance ends, you will meet yourself not as a stranger, but as a home you've been searching for all along. There will be no applause. There will be no audience. Only you. The whole you, the fierce you, the child you, the dark you, the eternal you. And that, finally, will be enough. Because now you know, you were never the reflection. You were always the fire.